MSImageSynth is a tool that breaks most of the conventions that I was familiar with in digital audio workstations and sound design tools. There's definitely a lot of familiar ground. However, the implementation is unusual and is effective, but in my opinion, demands that the user learn how MSImageSynth accomplishes what it does, instead of hoping that it can be reconfigured or changed to work in a way that's familiar. I'm not going to break down the interface except to make sure that we've switched to the Image Synth. And if you're not sure, we have a top portion, the waveform editor, and then the canvas down here. I'm going to select A for all and delete. I'm going to go here to the blue grid channel. I'm going to delete the grid channel. Then I'm going to change the size of to 512 by 128. All right. Actually, we'll go 1024. 512 by 128. It's great. If I hit G, that adds the default grid channel again. If you're unfamiliar with the grid, these are pixels that lie behind the audio channel that is rendered, and it's a great guideline if you're placing things by hand, and this will be interesting once we examine the tool grid, but I'm going to remove it for now. I'm going to delete the grid channel. I'm actually going to make this smaller, 256 by 128. All right. So there are tools and modes and settings all around this bottom section. Again, I want to focus on your concerns, so I'm not going to explain much of it except to point out these three modes for drawing tools, for the brush tool. This is the selector. This is one way to get to the tool selection. So I'm going to choose the first brush here, and then I'm going to make sure that we're on the first mode. There's 1, 2, 3 modes here: points, lines, and repeats, but we'll start with points. And I'm going to choose a brush size, which is, let's say, 8 by 8. That's 8 pixels by 8 pixels. So if I move somewhere on the canvas and I just click my mouse once, it will drop 8 by 8 pixel square in the center, wherever I've drawn it. Let's think about the brush flow mode for a second. This will affect how, so I can go around and click, click around. It's always going to be an 8 by 8 square. So I'm going to press A for all and hit the delete key, and D to deselect. And this time I'm going to click and drag to the right. So click, drag. Oh, I'm going to reselect my brush. Click and drag. All right. So I can draw like a brush tool in an art program, right? So the other way to get to this tool selection, instead of going back to the side, is to hold down Control and select the tool. So there I go. If I hit the space bar, it's going to render left to right. Frequency at the top is the high frequency, low is low. All right, so we are well outside the audible frequency up here. So I'm going to select all, and I'm going to use the arrow keys here. I'll move it down. Actually, right. So as we move down this canvas, we enter the audible frequency, and now we can set the range of frequencies here. I'm not going to go into that and the mapping. So let's go. Actually, we will do that. We'll go to major scale. I'm going to select all, delete, and let's try again, but with a smaller brush. So let's go to Control, brush size, and we'll choose something smaller. Let's go 3 by 3. So if I click and click and click and click without dragging, that's a square that's exactly 3 pixels by 3 pixels. Okay, A for all, delete, and then D for deselect. I'm going to Control click. I'm going to choose my brush again. This is still set to 3 by 3. So now again, I'm going to click and drag. And this time I'm going to hit the space bar to play. All right, so we're getting into audible frequency kind of down here. So now I'm going to go to the selection tool, get that out, Press play. All right. Okay. Go back to the first brush here, square brush. We're still at 3x3, and let's examine the tool grid and how that affects things. So again, I can draw by clicking and dragging across that canvas. A, delete, D. I'm going to control, click, back to the brush. So our brush is 3x3, right? Let's set our tool grid to 3x3. Now, if I draw now, the only change I've made is to change the values of the tool grid to from whatever it had been set to 3x3. Click and drag. No change, right? I'm going to hit Z to undo. You don't undo one step. Typically, maybe universally, it's been a while, but I never assume that I have multiple undo steps. So, one undo step. Let's enable the tool grid. Now, there's nothing visible. Unlike this grid here, the blue grid that appears when you draw the default grid or you add the grid. Setting or enabling the tool grid doesn't change anything visually. What it will affect is the behavior of the tool that you use when you click and drag on the canvas. So I'm going to control click just to make sure, right? On that first square brush tool, we're on points in points mode. We know that the brush size, right, was 3x3, and our grid size is 3x3. So I'm going to click and drag. Okay. It looks a bit different. If you were a very new user, you might not realize there's a huge difference. I'm going to disable tool grid. I'm going to draw immediately below it. Okay. Let's increase this to 12 by 12. And I'm going to draw in between. No change. Okay? And the reason is the values have changed, but the tool grid had been toggled off. So the tool grid is no longer quantizing the pixels that are being drawn using the tool that I've selected. Right? So let's enable tool grid. And I'm going to hit A. I'm going to move these up. Right, just to make a little space. D for deselect. Control click. Grab that brush, the square brush again. So the size of the brush hasn't changed. We've just gone from the selection tool back to the square brush. The tool grid is on, and now I'll click and drag on the bottom here. And suddenly it's very clear that a change has occurred, that it has impacted the drawing.